down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You sit down at a table, the server brings drinks, and then almost always, the next thing that happens, a basket of bread appears there in the middle of your table. Sometimes with butter, sometimes with a little olive oil, or maybe it's just fancy crackers and cheese. Sometimes instead of bread, it's a basket of tortilla chips or pita, depending on the cuisine. We are so accustomed to this ritual that we hardly even think about it. And even here in the church, bread has its place in the center of the table. Even when it isn't there, we leave its empty plate as a reminder that it will be there again very soon. Bread is something so simple, but also something so necessary. It connects us as human beings. It's a staple. It is often referred to as fruit of the earth. It connects us to our ancestors, to our friends, to our people. You can tell a lot about a person just by examining their bread. Breaking bread, bread in the wilderness, manna that came down from heaven, leavened bread and the unleavened bread, depending on the religious season. Bread connects us. We need it. We share it. Today's lesson about Jesus and the disciples and the feeding of thousands of people, all with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. This is a familiar story for most of us. So familiar, it's hard to hear it with fresh ears. It is the only miracle recorded in all 4 of the Gospels, so we know that it was a central account for the earliest Christians. Now, our modern tendency toward analysis and reason makes it easy for us to dismiss it. The numbers really don't make a whole lot of sense to us. How could 5 loaves and 2 fish feed more than 5,000 people? It might be helpful to know that in those days it was commonplace to exaggerate the numbers a bit, not only in texts of faith, but also in the historical record. Josephus, the famed historian of that time, admitted as much. And yet, we should approach what we assume to be even exaggerated numbers with caution, because the last thing we want to do is to diminish the miracle or dismiss the power of God. Perhaps it is there to help us remember and notice again the wonder of what happened take hold, even when hope hardly 2 fish and a few ordinary disciples, people just like us. This foundational gospel account isn't about magic, it's about sharing and abundance. In other gospel accounts, the disciples went to Jesus and tried to get him to send those crowds away, back into the towns. It was late and the market would be closing soon. The disciples reasoned that the people needed to go back into town to get their own food. You can tell that those disciples cared about these people, but that doesn't mean that they knew what to do with them. Certainly, there wasn't enough food here where they were. So the disciples looked to Jesus to fix the problem. In Matthew's gospel, the disciples went to Jesus wanting him to make some sort of executive decision to send those hungry people away. But Jesus feels the disciples are capable of handling the situation themselves. They need not go away, he says. You give them something to eat. I don't know about you, but when I look around at all the problems of our world today, I want to just pull the covers back over my head and pray that someone else will figure out how to solve all of them. They are overwhelming, and I am overwhelmed when I begin to think about them. Hunger is just one issue among so many, but just like all of the other problems out there, there are so many parts and pieces to it. Where are the viable grocery stores in poor neighborhoods, or healthy and nourishing food choices for school children, or affordable food options for the homeless or the poor? Add into it the problems with distribution and political barriers and wars and climate change. It is a mess, even in our modern world, with all of the technology and tools we have access to. We still haven't figured out how to solve hunger. It's no wonder that the disciples were overwhelmed with their assigned task. The crowd was too big. The problem was too big. They looked around and figured they didn't have enough. That's how I often feel, not just with the problem of hunger, but with all of the issues of today. There just aren't enough resources to address all of the things. The problems are too many, and I don't know what to do. I wish God would just fix it. That's what the disciples were hoping when they went to Jesus. They were hoping that Jesus would just fix it. But notice that Jesus wasn't in such great shape himself that day. What is often missed in this gospel account is how it begins. Today's text begins with the words, "after this." But Matthew's account gives a little bit more detail.